A young black man trembled before a judge who refused to even let him speak. No lawyer, no mercy, just a fine he could never pay. And in the back row, one man quietly stood up. The judge didn't know it yet, but that man was Keanu Reeves, and what he did next stopped the entire courtroom cold. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above the small courtroom, washing everything in a dull shade of gray. The air was heavy with the scent of old paper and stale coffee. Wooden benches creaked as a few people shifted in their seats, waiting for their names to be called. It wasn't the kind of courtroom seen on television. There were no cameras, no grand speeches, just tired faces, worn-out clerks, and lives being quietly judged. Keanu Reeves sat in the last row, his notebook open on his knee. He was there incognito, dressed in a plain charcoal jacket and jeans, studying courtroom behavior for an upcoming film. He had spent the last few days observing cases, quietly blending in with the crowd. But that morning felt different from the moment he walked in. The tension was thicker. Even the walls seemed to carry a sense of quiet resignation. Judge Harold Denton presided at the bench. His voice was sharp, his manner detached. He had a habit of tapping his gavel twice before every ruling, like a man who needed the sound to remind him of his power. The clerk read names quickly, and people shuffled up one after another, most of them nervous, confused, or defeated before they even spoke. Keanu noticed how the judge never looked anyone in the eye. He issued fines without hearing full explanations, scolded those who spoke too long, and cut off anyone who hesitated. Every sentence he spoke seemed to weigh heavier on those standing before him. Then, the door opened again, and a young black man stepped inside, escorted by a bailiff. He couldn't have been older than 23. His name, according to the docket, was Darius Coleman. He wore an oversized shirt, the kind you buy secondhand when money's tight. His sneakers were clean but old. He kept his head down, clutching a folded piece of paper, the ticket that had brought him here. The clerk called his name. Case number 27419, State of California versus Darius Coleman. Darius swallowed hard and stepped forward. His hand shook slightly as he placed the paper on the podium. The judge peered over his glasses and sighed. "Mr. Coleman, you're here for operating a vehicle with a broken brake light and failure to appear on your citation. How do you plead?" Darius looked confused. "Your Honor, I didn't mean to miss the date. I never got the letter in the mail. I was working nights, trying to—" The judge raised a hand. "Excuses won't help you here, son. Ignorance of the law is no excuse." The courtroom fell silent. Keanu shifted slightly in his seat, sensing something was wrong. The tone, the condescension. It wasn't justice, it was dismissal. Darius tried again. "Sir, I was delivering food that night. My mom's been sick, and I—" Judge Denton cut him off again, tapping his gavel twice. "That's enough. You were driving with a defective light, failed to appear in court, and now you expect leniency? The fine stands at $900. If you can't pay, you'll serve 10 days in county jail." The young man blinked, as if he hadn't heard correctly. The courtroom stayed still, waiting for him to respond. He looked down at the floor, then up at the judge. $900? His voice cracked. "I don't even make that in 2 weeks. Please, sir. I wasn't trying to ignore the court." The judge leaned back. "Then perhaps you should have prioritized your responsibilities. This court does not tolerate irresponsibility." Keanu closed his notebook slowly. He could feel his pulse picking up, his jaw tightening. The young man's face, scared, humiliated, stirred something deep in him. It reminded him of all the people he'd met who worked tirelessly, only to be dismissed because of how they looked or where they came from. Darius's shoulders slumped. "I just need time to pay it. Maybe a few weeks, that's all." Judge Denton frowned. "No extensions. Sentence stands." The gavel came down with a hollow crack that echoed across the room. Keanu sat frozen. He had promised himself he wouldn't interfere, that he was there only to observe. But as the bailiff reached for Darius's arm, he saw something in the young man's expression that changed everything. An expression that said he'd already lost long before he entered the room. For a moment, Keanu couldn't breathe. The weight of injustice pressed against his chest, impossible to ignore. He stared at the judge, then at Darius, and then back down at his notebook where he had written one line earlier that morning: "The measure of justice is how it treats the powerless." Now, that line no longer felt like something for a movie script. It felt like a call to action. The bailiff took a step closer to Darius, motioning for him to move toward the holding area. The sound of his boots on the tile echoed through the silent courtroom. Darius hesitated, glancing toward the benches where a few strangers sat watching. No one met his eyes. No one spoke. He looked utterly alone. Keanu's fingers tightened around his pen. He could feel the heat of injustice rising like a pulse in the room. The young man wasn't dangerous. He wasn't defiant. He was just scared, punished not for breaking a serious law, but for being poor. Darius turned once more toward the judge. "Please, sir. My mom's in the hospital. She needs me." His voice cracked. "Can't I just pay later?" Judge Denton didn't even glance up. "That's not how the law works. Take him." The bailiff reached out and gripped Darius's arm. The young man didn't resist. He lowered his head, his voice trembling. "I didn't mean any harm." The words hung in the air like smoke. Keanu watched as the door to the holding area closed behind him. The sound of the lock clicked softly, but to Keanu, it felt deafening. Something about it stayed with him: how easily a life could be dismissed, how quickly a system could crush a person who had no one to defend them. He looked around the courtroom again. A few people whispered. The judge moved on to the next case, as if nothing had happened. But Keanu couldn't shake the feeling that something irreversible had just unfolded before his eyes. He closed his notebook and leaned forward. His mind no longer studying, his conscience had taken over. Keanu sat motionless for a long moment after Darius was led away. The next defendant stood nervously before the judge, but Keanu barely heard the words. His thoughts replayed the look on Darius's face, that mixture of fear, confusion, and quiet surrender. It reminded him of people he had known growing up, the ones who worked hard but never caught a break, who learned early that justice didn't always look the same for everyone. He leaned back, staring at the American flag behind the bench. The irony cut deep. This was supposed to be the place where fairness lived, where everyone stood equal before the law. But what he had just witnessed was the opposite. A young man had been punished not for his crime, but for his circumstance. The gavel struck again for the next case. Keanu's mind raced. He wondered how many Darius Colemans passed through this courtroom every week, unseen, unheard, condemned for small mistakes that grew into chains of debt and despair. His pen hovered over the page, but he didn't write. The words in his mind were no longer about character study or performance. They were about truth, about courage, about how silence made you complicit. He felt a lump in his throat. Then, quietly, he stood. The clerk gave him a puzzled glance. The judge looked up, surprised to see the man who had been silently observing rise from his seat. Keanu didn't yet know what he would say. He only knew he couldn't leave the room without saying something. Because if he didn't, the system would roll on unchanged, and another Darius would walk through that same door tomorrow. The tension in the courtroom thickened. As Darius was brought back to stand before the bench, he clutched a crumpled citation in his hand, trying to keep his voice steady. His lips trembled slightly, but his eyes stayed on the judge, searching for some trace of fairness. "Your Honor," he began quietly, "I was delivering food when the brake light went out. I didn't even realize it until I was pulled over. My mom's sick, and I've been trying to cover her medicine bills. I didn't mean to ignore the ticket. I just didn't have the money that week." Judge Denton exhaled sharply through his nose. "Mr. Coleman," he said, his tone clipped and cold, "ignorance of the law is no excuse. It's your responsibility to maintain your vehicle and comply with court orders. This is not a charity." The words hit Darius like a slap. He tried again, his voice cracking. "I understand, sir, but I'm just asking for time. I can pay, just not right now. I work nights for a delivery service. I can." The gavel came down with a sharp crack. "Enough," the judge snapped. "$900 payable immediately, or 10 days in county jail." A soft gasp rippled through the benches. Darius froze. His mouth opened slightly, as if he were about to speak, but no words came out. He looked down at his shoes, his shoulders slumping under the weight of disbelief. "Your Honor," he said weakly, "I only make about $400 a week. I can't pay $900 right now. I don't even have that much saved. Please, just a payment plan." The judge waved a dismissive hand. "Not my concern. This court isn't here to manage your finances." The bailiff, a large man with a polished badge and an amused expression, leaned slightly against the rail, smirking. Keanu noticed it immediately. That look, one of quiet satisfaction in another man's humiliation, turned his stomach. Darius's breathing grew shallow. "Please. I'm not trying to make trouble. I just need time." Judge Denton looked down over his glasses, his voice dripping with condescension. "Then perhaps, Mr. Coleman, you should have thought of that before ignoring your citation." A heavy silence filled the room. Darius's eyes began to glisten, and he bit his lip hard to stop it from trembling. He glanced at the crowd, hoping someone might speak up for him, but no one moved. Keanu could feel every muscle in his body tighten. He scribbled in his notebook, though his hand shook slightly. He wrote only one phrase: "This isn't justice." The bailiff took a step forward. "Guess that's that," he muttered under his breath, loud enough for Keanu to hear. Darius lifted his head one last time. "I wasn't trying to disrespect the law," he said softly. "I was just trying to help my mom." The judge didn't even respond. He turned a page on his desk and called for the next case. The bailiff's hand landed firmly on Darius's shoulder, guiding him toward the side door. His posture sagged, as if the life had been drained from him. He didn't resist, but the tremor in his hands betrayed his fear. His mother's hospital bills, the late rent, the endless double shifts, all of it had brought him here, and now the law was treating him like a criminal for being poor. Keanu sat perfectly still, but inside, anger and disbelief churned like a storm. He had come here as an observer, to take notes for a role, but nothing in the script he'd imagined felt as real as this. The quiet cruelty of the system wasn't written on the judge's face. It was embedded in the process itself, cold and automatic. He looked around the courtroom. A young mother sat 2 rows ahead, clutching her toddler, eyes down. An older man with a construction hat fidgeted beside her. They all looked exhausted, defeated before their names were even called. Nobody said a word. Nobody dared. Darius turned once before he disappeared through the side door. For a moment, his gaze met Keanu's. There was confusion in it, not recognition, but a silent question. Why isn't anyone helping? Keanu's heart tightened. He swallowed hard and looked down at his notebook, trying to hide the emotion tightening his chest. He wrote again, slowly this time. "Justice without compassion isn't justice at all." The judge moved briskly to the next case, his tone unchanged, as if nothing significant had happened. A man stood up nervously to plead for a reduced fine. He was interrupted before he finished his second sentence. The rhythm of authority filled the room, mechanical, predictable, and indifferent. Keanu's jaw clenched. He could hear the faint whisper of the bailiff joking with a clerk near the door. 10 days for a light bulb cheaper than a mechanic. A few snickers followed. The sound made Keanu's blood run cold. He looked up again at the flag behind the bench, then at the words engraved above the judge's seat, "In God we trust." The irony cut deep. Was this the same trust that allowed men like Darius to be humiliated and locked up over a broken brake light? Keanu could no longer tell whether he was taking notes for a role or witnessing something he'd never forget. The scene burned into him, the powerless standing before power, the rich tone of mockery from the bailiff, the silence of the crowd, the hollow swing of the gavel that sealed it all. He shut his notebook and folded his hands together. The urge to speak rose stronger than ever, but he fought it down. For now, he needed to see how far this would go, how easily one man's dignity could be stripped in a place meant to uphold it. The moment passed, but something inside him didn't. Keanu sat with his hands clasped, elbows resting on his knees, staring at the door that had just closed behind Darius. He could still hear the faint echo of the bailiff's footsteps in his mind. 10 days in county jail. For a broken light. For being poor. The thought made his chest tighten. He felt that familiar ache, the same one he'd felt countless times when he'd seen someone treated as if their worth depended on the money in their pocket. The courtroom carried on, business as usual. The clerk read out the next name, and another tired man rose to face the same detached judge. Fines, fees, scoldings. It was a machine that never slowed down. The lives being decided here weren't people to the judge. They were numbers, cases, interruptions. In his morning routine, Keanu glanced toward the front row, where an older black woman sat quietly, wringing a handkerchief. Her face was lined with exhaustion. Something in her eyes made him wonder if she was Darius's mother. Her gaze stayed fixed on the door her son had been taken through. Her lips trembled as she whispered a silent prayer, though no one could hear it over the shuffle of papers and the drone of the judge's voice. Keanu wanted to move closer, to comfort her, but he hesitated. This wasn't a movie set. This was real, and he didn't yet know the right way to act. He reached for his notebook again, but this time, instead of notes, he wrote a single name across the page in bold, deliberate strokes: Darius Coleman. Then beneath it, Los Angeles County Court, 10 days jail, $900 fine. He wrote the date. He wasn't sure why. Maybe to remind himself later that this moment mattered, that he had seen it. A cell phone buzzed somewhere in the back. The bailiff barked a warning. A few heads turned, but the noise quickly died down. Keanu watched the next defendant, a delivery driver like Darius, plead for more time to pay his ticket. Again, the judge's response was merciless. No empathy, no patience, just the dull repetition of rules. The man walked away with a fine he couldn't pay. Another life quietly burdened. Keanu's heart pounded. The contrast between the courtroom's lifeless procedures and the real suffering unfolding inside it was unbearable. He had always believed that the law, despite its flaws, was built on fairness. But what he saw here wasn't fairness, it was punishment for poverty. As the morning session ended, the bailiff called for a recess. People shuffled out, whispering about the movie star in the back. Keanu ignored them. He stayed seated for a while, staring at the empty defendant's chair. The cushion still carried the faint crease from where Darius had Saturday. When he finally stood, he caught a glimpse of the older woman leaving the hallway. Her steps were slow, her head bowed. Without thinking, Keanu followed. He found her outside near the courthouse steps, holding a faded purse against her chest. She stood in the sunlight, but looked colder than she had inside. Keanu approached gently. "Excuse me," he said softly. "Were you here for Darius Coleman?" The woman turned, startled, then nodded. Her eyes were red, her voice trembling. "He's my son. They're taking him away. For a broken light." Her words hit like a blow. Keanu hesitated, his throat tightening. "I saw what happened," he said quietly. "I'm so sorry." She blinked hard, as if trying to hold back tears. "They don't listen to people like us. Never have." Keanu glanced back at the courthouse doors. The sound of the city seemed distant now, muffled by the weight of her words. Something deep inside him shifted a line he didn't know existed had been crossed. He looked back at her and said, almost to himself, "That's not how justice should work." The woman nodded faintly. "Justice?" she murmured. "We don't see much of that around here." Keanu's gaze lingered on her before turning toward the courthouse again. The breeze carried faint sounds of traffic and voices from the street below, but all he could hear was the echo of the gavel and the quiet dignity in Darius's trembling voice. He didn't know it yet, but this moment, this small act of seeing, was the beginning of something much larger than one trial. It was the start of a decision that would change lives far beyond this courthouse. The next morning, the same courtroom buzzed faintly with routine. Judge Denton adjusted his glasses, scanning his docket. The hum of fluorescent lights filled the silence, and the bailiff's monotone voice called for the next defendant. Then, in the back row, Keanu Reeves stood up. The movement drew immediate attention. Heads turned. Even the clerk stopped typing for a moment. The judge looked up, annoyed at the interruption. His eyes narrowed when he recognized the face before him. "Mr. Reeves." "The actor?" he asked, his tone a mix of surprise and skepticism. Keanu nodded politely. "Yes, Your Honor. I was here yesterday observing. May I speak briefly?" The judge leaned back, his chair creaking. "This is a court of law, not a press conference," he said coldly. "Are you a party to this case?" "No, sir," Keanu replied calmly, his hands clasped in front of him. "But I witnessed what happened to Mr. Coleman yesterday. I don't mean to disrupt, but something about it didn't feel right." The gallery murmured. The judge frowned. "Mr. Reeves, I don't appreciate outsiders commenting on judicial proceedings." Keanu's tone remained respectful. "I understand that, Your Honor. I'm not questioning your authority. I'm only asking if fairness was served. That young man wasn't given a lawyer, wasn't allowed to explain, and was fined more than he makes in 2 weeks. That doesn't sound like justice." A ripple of whispers spread across the room. The bailiff stepped forward, tense. "Sir, please take your seat." But Keanu didn't move. His voice stayed calm, steady, the same tone that made millions admire him, not loud or defiant, but sincere. "Your Honor, with respect, justice isn't only about rules, it's also about understanding." The judge's eyes hardened. "Mr. Reeves, are you questioning how I run my courtroom?" Keanu met his gaze without anger. "No, sir," he said softly. "I'm questioning the fairness of what I saw." For a moment, no one moved. The clerk froze with her fingers hovering over the keyboard. A man in the front row muttered something under his breath. The silence that followed was heavy thick with disbelief. The judge finally spoke, his voice clipped. "You have no standing here, Mr. Reeves. I suggest you return to your seat before you find yourself held in contempt." Keanu nodded slightly but didn't sit. His calm presence unsettled the entire room. "I'm not here to argue, Your Honor. But if the issue is money, I'd like to pay Mr. Coleman's fine. He shouldn't be jailed for being poor." The courtroom gasped. The bailiff turned his head sharply toward the judge, unsure of what to do. Judge Denton blinked, visibly thrown off. "You'll what?" Keanu repeated. "I'll pay the $900, right now, if that helps this man go free." The courtroom froze. For a long moment, the judge simply stared at Keanu, as if unsure whether he had heard correctly. The murmuring from the benches swelled until the bailiff barked for silence. Judge Denton cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "This court does not conduct business through charitable donations," he said stiffly. Keanu nodded, his expression calm. "This isn't charity, Your Honor. It's justice. The law exists to correct behavior, not destroy lives. If paying his fine allows him to return to work and care for his mother, then I'd like to do that." Quietly. The judge's pen slipped slightly against the paper. The courtroom wasn't used to this kind of reasoning. Compassion didn't fit neatly into its procedures. Reporters in the back, sensing a story, began whispering and taking notes. The judge noticed the attention and bristled. "Mr. Reeves," he said sharply, "you're an actor. You should know better than to grandstand in a court of law. Your presence here has already disrupted due process." Keanu met his gaze without blinking. "With respect, Your Honor, due process was disrupted the moment a man was sentenced without being allowed to speak." A collective inhale rippled through the crowd. The judge's cheeks flushed a faint red. "You are dangerously close to contempt," he said, his tone low and measured. Keanu remained still. His voice dropped, calm but firm. "Then so be it. If standing up for fairness is contempt, I'll accept it. But I can't sit here and pretend I didn't see what I saw." The room fell silent. Even the air conditioner's hum felt muted. Darius's mother, seated near the back again, covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wet. The bailiff hesitated, glancing between the two men, uncertain of his next move. Judge Denton leaned forward. "You think this court is unfair?" Keanu shook his head slowly. "I think this system forgets the people it's meant to serve. Rules matter, yes, but mercy does too." A pause. Then quietly he added, You once took an oath to uphold justice, not pride." The words struck like a spark in a dry room. The judge's knuckles tightened on the edge of the bench. He had been insulted before, but never with such dignity, never with such poise. Keanu's voice wasn't mocking. It was compassionate, almost sorrowful. That made it sting even more. For the first time in his career, Judge Denton didn't know how to respond. He looked down at the docket again, avoiding Keanu's eyes. His voice came out quieter now, though still guarded. "Very well. The court will accept your payment. Mr. Coleman will be released once the fine is processed." The crowd exhaled as though a weight had lifted. Keanu nodded respectfully and turned to Darius's mother. She met his gaze, tears spilling freely now. He offered a faint smile and whispered, "He deserves a chance, ma'am. That's all." The judge's gavel struck once, sealing the moment, but not its impact. The noise in the courtroom began to fade as Keanu's words sank in. Every person in the room, defendants, clerks, even the bailiff, had gone silent. For once, Judge Denton wasn't the loudest voice in the room. The stillness that followed was more powerful than any gavel strike. Keanu took a slow step forward. His voice carried warmth, not defiance. "Your Honor, I know this isn't how things are normally done, but I believe that every person who walks into this courtroom deserves to leave with their dignity. What I saw yesterday, it didn't feel like justice." The judge stiffened. "You presume much, Mr. Reeves. You're an observer, not a participant. I suggest you remember your place." Keanu's voice didn't waver. "I know my place, sir. It's as a citizen who believes fairness matters. That young man didn't ask for special treatment. He asked to be heard." The judge exhaled, the lines on his forehead deepening. He had dealt with angry defendants, unruly attorneys, and protesters before. But not this. Not quiet conviction from a man who didn't raise his voice once. The bailiff shifted uncomfortably. Even he seemed unsure now. The power in the room was changing hands, not through intimidation, but through truth. "Mr. Reeves," the judge finally said, his tone lower. "You can't fix the world by paying one man's fine." Keanu nodded slowly. "Maybe not, but I can start with one. And maybe that shows others that compassion isn't weakness, it's strength." Darius's mother began to sob softly from the back. The sound cracked the cold formality of the room like a fracture in glass. The judge's eyes flicked toward her, then back to Keanu. "I'll allow it," he said at last. "The court will accept payment." Keanu gave a small nod of thanks and reached for his wallet. He walked toward the clerk's desk, every step echoing against the tile floor. The bailiff stepped aside wordlessly, his earlier smirk long gone. When the clerk took the payment, Keanu turned toward the courtroom and spoke again, more quietly now. "Your Honor, I hope one day every person who stands before you feels like they've been seen, not just judged." No one moved. For a moment, even Judge Denton couldn't look him in the eye. Keanu returned to his seat, calm as ever, and opened his notebook once more. On a clean page, he wrote one line: "Fairness is the language of the heart, not the rule book." Behind him, someone whispered, "That man just changed everything." And though the proceedings continued, the room felt different. The chill was gone. Something human had entered the law that morning. The silence that followed Keanu's offer was heavy enough to make the air feel solid. Judge Denton's glare cut through the room like a blade. His knuckles pressed white against the bench as he leaned forward. "Mr. Reeves," he said slowly, "I strongly advise you to stay out of legal matters that do not concern you." Keanu didn't flinch. His breathing was steady, calm, like a man standing in the eye of a storm. His voice was even, almost gentle. "I understand, Your Honor, but this concerns all of us. If justice isn't fair for one person, it stops being fair for everyone." The judge's eyes narrowed. "You think you can lecture this court on fairness?" "I don't mean to lecture," Keanu replied quietly. "I'm here as a citizen who saw something wrong. If paying this fine allows that young man to go home to his mother, then I'd like to do it. That's all." The crowd behind him began to murmur. Someone whispered his name in disbelief. Another person gasped softly. The bailiff glanced at the judge, waiting for direction. Even Darius, standing at the defendant's table, looked unsure whether he had heard correctly. His lips parted, but no words came out. Judge Denton adjusted his glasses, visibly irritated. "You're out of line, Mr. Reeves. You can't just walk into my courtroom and decide how sentences are carried out." Keanu nodded once. "I'm not here to decide anything, sir. I'm here to help someone who was given no chance to defend himself." The room grew tense. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Outside, faint sounds of traffic filtered in from the street, but inside the courtroom, every breath felt like it echoed. Darius lowered his gaze to the floor, ashamed, as if somehow he had caused all this trouble. His hands trembled slightly against the wooden table. He wanted to speak, but didn't dare. The judge's glare sharpened. "This is a court of law, not a theater, Mr. Reeves. You will not use it as a stage for moral displays." Keanu's tone stayed level. "Then let's not make it a stage for humiliation either." The words landed hard. The clerk froze mid-typing. The bailiff looked down, suddenly uncomfortable. Even the reporters, lingering by the hallway door, stopped whispering. Everyone knew something extraordinary was happening. Something that didn't fit the rigid walls of this courtroom. Judge Denton's nostrils flared. "You're testing my patience." Keanu met his gaze, unblinking. Maybe patience is exactly what justice needs more of. The judge's gavel twitched in his hand, but he didn't strike it. His voice was colder now. "You have no legal standing here. You cannot intervene." Keanu nodded slightly. "Then I'll do it as a private citizen. I'll pay the fine, not as an actor, not as anyone special, just a man who believes another man shouldn't be punished for being poor." The words hung in the air like thunder before a storm. The courtroom gasped audibly this time. The sound of Keanu's voice lingered long after he finished speaking. It carried no arrogance, no showmanship, only quiet conviction. The judge looked taken aback, as if the courtroom itself had turned against him. He shifted in his seat and adjusted his robe, trying to reassert control. "Mr. Reeves," he began slowly, "this court cannot allow civilians to interfere with sentencing procedures. That is not how the system works." Keanu's reply was calm but firm. "Then maybe the system needs to remember why it exists in the first place, to serve people, not break them." The words struck harder than anyone expected. The bailiff, who had once smirked, stood straighter, his expression now uneasy. A young woman in the second row clasped her hands together. Even the reporter near the door hesitated before jotting another note, his pen trembling slightly. Judge Denton's jaw tightened. "You speak of fairness as though it's simple. Do you know what it's like to sit here day after day, hearing excuse after excuse from people who refuse to take responsibility?" Keanu nodded gently. "I don't claim to know that burden, Your Honor, but I do know that responsibility should never outweigh compassion. They're supposed to exist together." The judge blinked, visibly wrestling with the statement. For a moment, his expression softened, then hardened again. He leaned forward. This man broke the law. That is not up for debate. Keanu didn't deny it. Yes, he did. But the punishment doesn't fit the offense. His brake light went out, and he was fined nearly $1,000 for it. That's not justice, that's imbalance. Darius finally raised his head, eyes wide. It was the first time he'd ever seen someone speak to a judge like that. Not with anger, but with dignity. He swallowed hard, fighting the emotion rising in his throat. The judge rubbed his temples, clearly torn. "Mr. Reeves, you're creating a spectacle. The courtroom is not a place for emotion." Keanu stepped slightly closer. "Maybe that's why people stop believing in justice, because it's lost its heart." The statement hit the room like a jolt of electricity. No one dared to move. The clerk's fingers hovered above the keys. The bailiff stared at the floor, and even the distant sound of a phone buzzing outside seemed to fade. Judge Denton's lips pressed into a thin line. He wanted to end this, to reassert dominance, but something in Keanu's eyes stopped him. It wasn't rebellion, it was sincerity. a kind of quiet courage that made every objection sound small. Finally, the judge exhaled sharply. "You're saying you want to pay this man's fine yourself?" Keanu nodded once. "Yes, Your Honor. Not as an actor, not for attention, just as someone who believes mercy still belongs in this room." For the first time, the judge didn't respond immediately. He looked at Darius, at the trembling mother in the back row, then back at Keanu. The silence stretched until even the walls seemed to lean in, waiting. The judge sat motionless, his gavel resting quietly in his hand. He looked down at the papers before him, but the words on the page meant nothing now. For the first time in years, the courtroom wasn't under his control. He felt the weight of hundreds of unseen eyes, the tension of a truth he didn't want to acknowledge. Keanu stood patiently, not demanding, not forcing, just waiting. His stillness was its own kind of pressure. The murmurs that had once filled the room were gone, replaced by the fragile silence of conscience. Finally, Judge Denton spoke, his tone low. "You put this court in a difficult position, Mr. Reeves. What you're suggesting goes beyond normal procedure." Keanu nodded once. "I understand that, Your Honor, but doing the right thing often does." The judge tapped the edge of his desk with his finger, a nervous habit disguised as authority. "You're aware this may be perceived as favoritism, celebrity influence?" Keanu's answer was immediate. "Then let's make it anonymous. The name doesn't matter. The act does." The room fell still again. The bailiff, who only hours ago mocked Darius, now looked uncomfortable in his own uniform. The court reporter stared at Keanu, as if seeing decency itself take form. The judge glanced toward Darius. The young man stood frozen, eyes wide, his mouth slightly open. "You're really doing this?" he whispered. Keanu turned toward him. "Everyone deserves a fair shot, Darius. That's all." The moment stretched. Even the sound of cars from outside seemed to fade, as if the whole world had paused to see what the judge would do. Finally, with a heavy breath, Judge Denton leaned back. His voice softened, though pride still lingered in the tone. "Very well," he said at last. "The court will accept the payment." Gasps echoed through the benches. A woman covered her mouth in disbelief. The bailiff blinked, looking almost relieved. Keanu inclined his head respectfully. "Thank you, Your Honor." The judge tried to recompose himself. "Mr. Coleman is hereby released once payment is confirmed. Court adjourned for recess." He struck the gavel, but his voice wavered slightly at the end. As the bailiff stepped away to process the fine, Keanu walked toward Darius's mother. Her eyes were filled with tears. She tried to speak, but couldn't. Keanu placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "He'll be out soon," he said softly. "Take care of him." She nodded, whispering a single word, "Bless you." Reporters who had gathered in the hall began whispering furiously, trying to confirm what they'd just seen. Some rushed toward the doors, already dialing their editors, but Keanu didn't look at them. He stayed by the courtroom's exit, waiting quietly until Darius appeared. When the young man finally stepped out, free but overwhelmed, Keanu gave a small nod and said only, "Let's get you home." The moment didn't need applause. It was the kind of silence that changes everything. The sound of justice remembering its purpose. The heavy wooden doors of the courtroom creaked open, and the hallway beyond was already buzzing with low whispers. Darius stepped out, blinking against the sudden brightness. His mother, Elaine Coleman, stood at the end of the corridor. The moment she saw him, she cried out his name and rushed forward, tears streaming down her face. She wrapped her arms around him before he could even speak. "Oh, baby," she sobbed, her voice breaking with relief. "They said you were going to jail, I thought." Darius held her tight, his voice trembling. "It's okay, Mom. It's over. I'm okay." Keanu stood a few steps back, giving them space. His expression was calm, but his eyes carried the weight of what had just happened. He watched as the mother clung to her son, the two of them holding onto each other like they'd been pulled back from the edge of something terrible. Elaine turned, finally, recognizing him. For a moment, she froze, disbelief flooding her features. You're Keanu Reeves," she whispered. Her hands trembled as she wiped her tears. I don't even know what to say. You saved my son. Keanu shook his head gently. You don't owe me thanks, ma'am. You owe it to yourself to believe this isn't how justice should work. Her lip quivered. People don't stand up like that anymore, she said softly. Not for people like us. Keanu gave a small, sad smile. Then maybe it's time they start. The echo of his words seemed to fill the hallway. A group of reporters who had gathered near the door started to move closer, sensing a story. Cameras clicked. Microphones were raised. Someone called out, Mr. Reeves, can we get a comment? Keanu glanced toward the noise but didn't immediately answer. He looked at Darius and Elaine instead, wanting them to have a moment of peace before the world invaded again. The hallway was narrow, the walls lined with old photographs of judges long gone, faces of authority staring down. From another era, Darius looked at Keanu and spoke quietly. You didn't have to do that for me. You don't even know me. Keanu smiled faintly. That's exactly why I had to. The simplicity of the words struck Darius. He nodded slowly, as though trying to understand a kind of kindness he'd never experienced before. The reporters pressed closer now. One voice cut through the noise. Mr. Reeves, why did you interfere in a legal proceeding? Are you trying to make a statement? Keanu turned slightly, meeting the reporter's gaze with quiet steadiness. I'm not making a statement, he said. I just believe silence helps no one. The hallway burst into a flurry of voices after his words. Silence helps no one, that single phrase spread like fire through the group of reporters. Cameras flashed, microphones angled toward him, the air thick with the sound of questions colliding over one another. Mr. Reeves, do you believe the justice system is broken? Was this act planned? Do you think your fame influenced the court's decision? Keanu raised a hand slightly, signaling for calm. His tone remained even, almost quiet against the chaos. I didn't come here to make headlines, he said. I came to learn. I was observing a courtroom for a film role, and what I saw yesterday, it didn't sit right. I just did what any person should do when they see something wrong. The crowd softened for a moment, unsure how to react. His humility disarmed them. He wasn't performing. He was simply telling the truth. Elaine still clung to Darius's arm, her eyes red and swollen but glowing with gratitude. She whispered, He's a good man, Darius. God sent him today. Darius nodded quietly, his gaze fixed on Keanu. He didn't see a movie star. In that moment, he saw someone who cared enough to stand up when no one else did. A young female journalist stepped forward, voice trembling slightly. Mr. Reeves, what made you calm? His hands folded loosely in front of him. Elaine walked up to him once more, still trembling slightly. You don't know what this means to us, she said softly. Nobody ever stands up for people like my son. We're used to being ignored. Keanu shook his head. No one should get used to being ignored. You both deserve better than that. Darius looked down, his voice low. I was ready to go to jail, Mr. Reeves. I thought that was just how life worked for people like me. You changed that. Keanu looked at him closely. Don't give me that credit, Darius. You spoke the truth. You faced it head on. That's courage. Remember that. Darius nodded, eyes glistening. I'll remember. From the corner, another camera clicked. A small local station had been recording quietly from afar. The clip would later circulate online the moment when Keanu placed a reassuring hand on Darius's shoulder and said those words. As they stepped outside, the California sun bathed the courthouse steps in light. A light breeze carried the sounds of traffic and city life, normal and indifferent to what had just happened inside. But for the Colemans, everything felt different. Elaine turned once more, emotion thick in her voice. Can I ask you something, Mr. Reeves? Why did you really do it? People would have understood if you stayed quiet. Keanu paused, his expression thoughtful. Because silence helps no one, he said again, this time more quietly. The moment we stop speaking for what's right, we start losing who we are. Those words, caught clearly by a microphone nearby, would soon travel far beyond those courthouse steps. That evening, news stations ran the story under the same headline. Keanu Reeves speaks out in courtroom. Silence helps no one. The video went viral overnight. Millions shared it online, not because it featured a celebrity, but because it revealed something raw and human, the courage to act when it would have been easier to look away. Comments poured in from every corner of the country. Veterans, single mothers, former defendants, even public defenders wrote about their own experiences with unfair treatment. Darius and Elaine sat together at home that night, watching the clip on a small television. Darius turned to his mother, still in disbelief. "Do you think this will really change anything?" Elaine smiled faintly. "Maybe it already has." Keanu, sitting alone in his car hours later, read the news headlines on his phone but didn't smile. He wasn't proud, just reflective. The courtroom might have been one small battle, but deep down, he knew this wasn't the end of it. The next morning, Los Angeles woke to a headline that no one expected. Every local station replayed the same clip: Keanu Reeves standing in a small county courtroom, speaking calmly to a startled judge. His words echoed across screens and headlines. Silence helps no one. The morning news anchors dissected the scene as if it were a political event. Some praised his courage, calling it a powerful act of moral conscience. Others accused him of celebrity interference. On talk radio, hosts debated whether he had overstepped boundaries or exposed something broken in the system. One host on a major network said, "What Keanu did was brave. He didn't grandstand. He acted from compassion. That's what leadership looks like." Another countered, "We can't have movie stars walking into courts deciding outcomes. That's chaos." But beyond the noise, something deeper began to stir. On social media, thousands of people began sharing their own stories. Stories of small injustices that never made the news. One woman wrote, "I was fined $400 for missing a court date after my son was hospitalized. Nobody cared to hear why." A veteran shared, "I lost my license because I couldn't afford court fees. It took me 3 years to get back on my feet." The comments multiplied. By the hour, number "Justice for All" trended nationwide before noon. Most didn't even mention Keanu's name. They talked about fairness, about dignity, about how ordinary people were punished for being poor. That afternoon, clips from talk shows flooded YouTube. Keanu's calm expression in that courtroom became a symbol not of fame, but of decency. People wrote, "He didn't argue, he didn't insult, he just stood for what's right." Meanwhile, Keanu sat alone in his kitchen, watching the coverage quietly. His phone buzzed nonstop. Agents, journalists, and friends wanted statements. He ignored most of them. His attention stayed fixed on the screen, not on the praise, but on the comments scrolling underneath the video. One in particular caught his eye. A woman from Ohio wrote, "If people like him won't speak up, who will? My brother's still in jail over unpaid fines. No one ever helped him." Keanu leaned back, rubbing his temples. He wasn't interested in being celebrated. What unsettled him was how common these stories were. He realized that the cruelty he'd witnessed in that courtroom wasn't rare. It was routine. It was systemic. As the footage replayed in the background, Keanu reached for his phone. He hesitated, then dialed his assistant. The call connected after one ring. "Nina," he said quietly, "I need you to find someone who works in legal aid for people who can't afford lawyers. I want to understand how this system works and how we can help fix it." The following day, Keanu's face was everywhere: news tickers, podcasts, and late-night shows. Every host had an opinion. Some called him a hero, others a reckless do-gooder. But what captured the public wasn't the debate. It was the still image of him standing in that courtroom, unarmed, except for his voice. On one show, a political commentator said, "It's easy to stand up when cameras are rolling." Another replied, "Except they weren't supposed to be rolling." This wasn't a performance. This was instinct. The clip replayed behind them, muted but powerful: Keanu's calm posture against the rigid judge. By noon, hundreds of thousands of people had seen the video. Keanu's phone buzzed again and again, with messages from friends and strangers alike. Some sent congratulations. Others, words of warning. His manager texted, "We need to talk about this. It's becoming big." His agent wrote, "You've touched a nerve. Let's tread carefully." Keanu didn't respond. He sat in his quiet living room, blinds half drawn, scrolling through messages from people he'd never met. A single mother from Texas wrote, "I cried watching you speak. My son was fined for missing school when he had pneumonia. They treated us like criminals." Another said, "My brother went to jail over a parking ticket. Thank you for showing the world what we live through." Each story weighed on him. He read them all, one after another, his heart tightening with each line. The screen glowed faintly in the dim light, a window into hundreds of lives that mirrored Darius's pain. He set the phone down, exhaling deeply. The world was praising him, but it felt wrong to take credit. He hadn't solved anything, he had only revealed a wound. The system, he realized, wasn't failing by mistake. It was designed to move quickly, efficiently, and coldly. It punished poverty while pretending to uphold justice. As evening settled in, he turned on the television again. A legal analyst was speaking. "This case is symbolic," she said. "Mr. Reeves's intervention shines light on a truth most Americans already know. Our small courts have become debt traps. People are jailed for being broke. The law isn't broken, it's blind to compassion." Keanu leaned forward, elbows on his knees. That was it. Compassion. The missing piece. He could almost hear Darius's trembling voice in that courtroom, still echoing in his mind. His phone vibrated again. This time, Nina returned his call. "Hey boss," she said. "I found a few organizations. There's one downtown that helps with legal defense for low-income families. Want me to set up a meeting?" "Yes," he replied. "Tomorrow morning." "And Nina, this isn't about publicity. No press, no cameras." "I know," she said softly. "You mean it. I always do." He hung up, closing his eyes for a moment. The sound of the news still played faintly in the background. Outside, Los Angeles buzzed with late-night life. But inside, Keanu's thoughts were still with one young man and a courtroom that revealed too much about the world he lived in. The next morning, Keanu woke early. The city outside was still gray and quiet, but the media storm hadn't slowed. As he brewed his coffee, the news anchors on TV were already replaying the footage again. His own face stared back from the screen, frozen, mid-sentence, mid-truth. A scrolling banner at the bottom read, "Keanu Reeves questions fairness in local court, hero or overreach." He muted the sound. It wasn't the voices that mattered. It was what the moment had revealed. He had only spoken up once, but people had listened. Now they were talking about things that no one used to care about. Court fines, public defenders, bail reform. The conversation was finally happening, and that gave him hope. Still, he knew hope wasn't enough. Words faded. Action lasted. He sat down at his table with a legal pad and began jotting notes. Not for a movie, not for a speech, for a plan. He wrote legal aid accessibility, public defense, awareness. Then he underlined the words, justice for all. The phrase stayed with him. It felt right, simple, human, and true. Nina arrived mid-morning, holding her tablet and 2 coffees. "You're already up, huh?" she said, setting one down. "I've got a list of organizations you might want to meet. Most of them are underfunded, but they're doing incredible work." Keanu smiled faintly. "Those are my kind of people." She swiped through photos and profiles: public defenders, law professors, social workers. One image caught his attention. A woman named Angela Rivera, a public attorney who had spent 20 years defending low-income clients. Her quote on the site read, "Justice without access is just theater." He nodded slowly. "That's the one. Reach out to her." Nina tilted her head. "You're serious about this, aren't you?" "Completely," Keanu said. "Yesterday I saw what happens when good people stay quiet. That judge didn't care about power, he cared about control. But control isn't justice." Nina hesitated, then asked, "You know this is going to get big, right? The press already wants to follow your next move." Keanu smiled softly. "Then let them follow kindness for once." He took a sip of his coffee and looked out the window. The city stretched wide beneath the morning light. Millions of stories, millions of struggles. Somewhere, another Darius was standing before another judge, praying for mercy. That thought stayed with him. Later that night, as the world kept debating whether he'd gone too far, Keanu sat alone in his office scrolling through one last round of comments. They came from strangers across the country. One read, "I wish I had someone like him in my courtroom." Another said, "He reminded me that justice should feel human." He set the phone down and whispered to himself, "Then that's where we'll start." It wasn't about a viral clip anymore. It was about a mission, one that would take more than words, more than fame, but exactly the kind of courage that had made him stand up in that courtroom in the first place. The following morning, Nina drove Keanu through downtown Los Angeles. The traffic crawled past murals, courthouses, and faded signs for bail bonds. Keanu sat in silence beside her, watching the city blur by, his thoughts still fixed on the courtroom scene that had changed everything. They arrived at a narrow brick building tucked between a laundromat and a family clinic. The small sign read, "Public Defender's Office, Los Angeles County." Inside, fluorescent lights flickered faintly, and the faint smell of coffee lingered in the air. A woman with tired but determined eyes stepped out from a side office. "Mr. Reeves?" she asked, wiping ink from her hands. "I'm Angela Rivera. You spoke with Nina?" Keanu smiled politely and shook her hand. "Yes, thank you for meeting with me. I know your time's valuable." Angela chuckled lightly. "Time's the one thing we don't have enough of around here." Her tone carried exhaustion, but also pride. She gestured toward her cluttered desk. "Please, sit." Stacks of files were piled everywhere. Manila folders labeled with names, case numbers, and words like arraignment and plea deal. A small heater hummed under the desk despite the warm day. Angela sat across from him, her eyes sharp and focused. "So," she began, "I saw the video. You got a lot of people talking." Keanu shook his head slightly. "That wasn't the goal. I just couldn't stay quiet." "I get that," she said, folding her hands. "You saw a system that isn't working for everyone. The sad truth is, it's not broken. It's built this way." Keanu leaned forward. "You mean the fines, the bail, the pressure to plead guilty?" Angela nodded. "Exactly. Most of my clients can't afford a lawyer, so they take plea deals just to get home. Some of them don't even understand what they're signing. The system's designed to move fast, not fair." Keanu frowned. "So people's lives are changed forever over paperwork?" Angela sighed, her voice softening. "Every day. Miss one court date, and you lose your license. Lose your license, and you lose your job. Then the fines pile up, and soon you're trapped in a loop you can't escape." Keanu sat back, silent for a moment. The weight of her words sank deep. "I didn't realize it was this widespread," he said quietly. Angela gave a tired smile. "Most people don't, until it happens to them." He looked around at the mountain of case files. "You handle all these?" "Me and 3 other lawyers," she replied. "For the whole district." The number stunned him. "That's impossible." Angela shrugged. "We do what we can, but justice has a line out the door." Keanu's silence turned into resolve. "Then let's do something about it." Angela studied him carefully. "Do something about it," she repeated, almost amused. "Mr. Reeves, I've been fighting this fight for 20 years. You can't fix the justice system with good intentions. It's too big, too old, too political." Keanu smiled faintly. "Maybe. But big things have to start small. So, what would make a real difference right now? Today?" She hesitated, leaning back in her chair. "Honestly, more lawyers, more funding, more public attention. But nobody wants to donate to a cause they can't see. People care about sick children or disaster relief. They don't care about defendants in courtrooms." Keanu nodded. "Until they see what you see every day." Angela gave a dry laugh. "That's the problem. If people saw it, they'd stop believing in the word justice." She opened a file and slid it across the desk. "Take this one, Marcus Kelly, father of 2, lost his job, missed a court date for a traffic ticket, license suspended, then arrested on his way to pick up his kids. He's been in jail for 12 days. Because he can't afford a $300 bond. Keanu looked down at the paperwork. The mugshot was haunting. 12 days, he murmured. For $300. Angela nodded. His kids are in foster care now. That's the price of poverty. Keanu set the file down carefully. How many more are there like him? Angela motioned toward the stacks behind her. Thousands. The weight of the room seemed to close in. The hum of the heater, the faint traffic noise from outside, it all felt distant. Keanu pressed his fingertips together. How do you stay hopeful in this? Angela smiled sadly. Hope isn't optional. It's survival. You stop hoping. You stop fighting. He nodded slowly, letting her words sink in. What if there was a way to give people like you resources, lawyers, volunteers, funding to take some of this pressure off? Angela tilted her head. You mean a charity? Something better, Keanu said. Something sustainable, a foundation that provides legal aid for the poor, connects lawyers who want to help, maybe even educates people about their rights. Angela looked skeptical but intrigued. That sounds noble. It also sounds expensive. Keanu's expression didn't change. Then we'll start small. One office, one lawyer, one case. Angela studied him for a moment, realizing he wasn't just talking. He meant every word. You really want to step into this world? She asked. Keanu smiled slightly. I already have. Angela leaned forward, resting her elbows on the desk. You're serious, aren't you? Completely, he said. Let's figure out how to do this right. She nodded slowly, then reached for her phone. Then, you'll need to meet some people. Angela's fingers hovered over her phone for a moment before she set it down again. You know, most people who come in here want a photo or a quote, she said softly. They want to feel good for caring. You're the first who's asked how to help for real. Keanu smiled gently. I don't care about looking good. I care about doing good. That answer drew a small, genuine laugh from her, the first one of the morning. All right then, Mr. Reeves, she said, leaning forward. You want to see how deep the problem goes? Spend a day with me at arraignment court tomorrow. Watch what happens to people who can't pay for counsel. By the end, you'll understand why I look this tired. Keanu nodded immediately. I'll be there. Angela studied his face, realizing she didn't have to convince him of anything. His eyes already carried the quiet determination of someone who had seen injustice and couldn't unsee it. You'll need clearance to sit in the front, she said. I'll make a call. As they stood, Nina handed Angela a folder. Here's what we discussed, she said. Background on the foundation idea. Preliminary notes. He wants to fund it himself. No sponsors. Angela raised an eyebrow. No sponsors? That's ambitious. Keanu nodded. Money isn't the problem. The problem is awareness and empathy. We can build those faster if it's not buried under politics. Angela's tone softened. You're serious about this, aren't you? Completely, he said. We'll call it something simple. Something that means what it says. Angela crossed her arms, thinking for a moment. Justice for all. Keanu repeated the words quietly. Justice for all. He smiled. That's it. The phrase filled the small office like sunlight cutting through dust. For the first time since walking in, Angela looked hopeful. All right, she said finally. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. I'll get you data on case backlogs, contacts in legal aid clinics, maybe some retired judges who still care about fairness. You'll need credibility. I'll need you, Keanu said simply. She nodded, a rare warmth breaking through the years of courtroom cynicism. Then, we'll start tomorrow. Nina checked her watch. We should go if we want to beat traffic. Keanu reached across the desk, offering his hand again. Thank you, Angela. You've opened my eyes to more than I expected. Angela shook it firmly. Thank you for not walking away once they were open. As he left the office, Keanu glanced back one last time. The piles of case files looked endless, but for the first time, he didn't see hopelessness. He saw the beginning of something, an idea strong enough to turn one act of courage into a movement. Outside, the city was loud and restless, horns blaring, sirens echoing through the streets. But beneath all that noise, Keanu could hear something else rising, the quiet heartbeat of change, steady and unstoppable. The next afternoon, the sunlight spilled through the wide windows of a small downtown coffee shop. The place smelled of roasted beans and ambition, the kind of spot where ideas took root between tired lawyers and dreamers. Angela sat at a corner table, already surrounded by 2 law students, their backpacks cluttered with notes, casebooks, and half-finished lattes. When Keanu walked in, the conversation quieted. He smiled politely, holding a notebook under his arm. "Sorry I'm late. Traffic was the same old story," he said, taking a seat across from them. Angela introduced the 2 students. "This is Maya and Luke. They're interns at the public defender's office. Smart, idealistic, not yet jaded, so I thought they'd be perfect for this conversation." Maya grinned shyly. Luke nodded, visibly starstruck. Keanu returned the gesture warmly. "Good to meet you both. I'm not here as an actor, by the way. Just a guy who saw something that didn't sit right." Angela leaned back, crossing her arms. "So, Mr. Reeves," she teased lightly, "what's the plan?" Keanu opened his notebook and began sketching rough circles and lines, simple, direct. "We start small," he said. "A nonprofit that helps people who can't afford a lawyer. We provide guidance, maybe even legal representation, not just to fight cases, but to give people hope." Maya's eyes lit up, "Like a safety net for people who fall through the cracks." "Exactly," Keanu said. "There are too many cracks and too few hands trying to close them." Angela looked down at the sketch, frowning thoughtfully. "You're talking about something massive, Keanu. You'd need staff, permits, funding, lawyers willing to work for pennies." Keanu smiled softly. "Dreams are what build the impossible." She sighed, shaking her head but smiling despite herself. "You're quoting movie lines now," he chuckled. "Maybe. But every change starts with one stubborn idea, doesn't it?" Luke leaned forward, excitement breaking through his reserved demeanor. "What if we connected to schools or law programs? Students like us could volunteer, we'd get experience, and clients would get help." Angela nodded slowly. "That's actually smart. Law schools love civic engagement. We could pair students with mentors, have them assist in minor cases." Maya added, "We could focus on low-level offenses, traffic violations, unpaid fines, small misdemeanors. That's where the system bleeds people dry." Keanu's expression brightened. "That's perfect. The kind of work that never makes headlines, but changes lives quietly." Angela tapped her pen against the table. "We'd still need legitimacy, a name that stands for something real." Keanu looked up, eyes steady. "We already have one. Justice for all." The table fell silent. The name hung in the air for a moment, simple, pure, undeniable. Angela repeated it softly, as if testing the sound. "Justice for all." She smiled faintly. "It fits." Luke grinned. "It's bold." Maya added, "It's human." Angela leaned forward again. "All right, Keanu. Let's assume this works. What's the first step?" Keanu didn't hesitate. "We start with one case. One person who needs help. We prove it's possible before we build anything bigger." Angela studied him closely. "You're serious about that?" He nodded. "Completely." The 2 students exchanged glances, visibly inspired. Angela leaned back, a spark of belief glimmering in her eyes. "Then I guess justice for all starts today." Outside, the city noise faded into background music as their coffee cooled. The dream that seemed impossible only minutes earlier began to take shape in the silence between them, something fragile, but alive. Angela opened her laptop, the screen glowing softly in the warm afternoon light. "All right," she said, "if we're serious about this, we need to figure out logistics. We'll need nonprofit registration, a basic charter, maybe a board of directors." Keanu nodded. "We'll make it official when we have to. For now, it's just about helping one person. One win." Luke looked up eagerly. "There's a man named Marcus Kelly, you mentioned him yesterday," he said to Angela. "He's still in county jail. His bail's $300. Angela sighed, rubbing her temples. "Yeah, him. Single dad. Lost his job, can't post bail. It's a simple case, but no one's taken it. Keanu leaned forward. Then that's where we start. I'll cover his bail. Angela frowned. It's not that easy. He'll need representation for his next hearing. But, she paused, we could take him as our first case. Justice for all, case number 1. Maya smiled, her pen already scribbling in her notebook. I'll research the paperwork for bail petitions. Angela gave a small laugh. You two are quick learners. Keanu watched them work for a moment, a quiet pride forming behind his calm expression. It reminded him of movie sets before the cameras rolled, everyone focused, believing in something that didn't exist yet but soon would. Only this time, it wasn't fiction. Angela's phone buzzed with a message, pulling her attention away. She read it, then looked up. You're trending again, Keanu. Hashtags everywhere. People are calling you the Courtroom Samaritan. Keanu chuckled softly. I've been called worse. Let them talk. The noise might actually help us find the right people. Angela smirked. You know, most celebrities would be hiding right now. Most celebrities weren't there, he said simply. They didn't look into that young man's eyes and see what the system does to people. Angela studied him for a moment and nodded. All right, you're in this for the right reasons. Maya closed her laptop. We can use this momentum to attract volunteers. Maybe even set up a simple website, Luke added, and a donation fund. People will want to help once they see what we're doing. Keanu smiled faintly. Then let's give them something worth believing in. Angela extended her hand again, this time not as a lawyer, but as a partner. Welcome to Justice for All, Mr. Reeves. He shook her hand firmly. No titles, he said. Just Keanu. The group laughed lightly, but the moment carried weight. It was the beginning of something larger than all of them, a seed planted in a noisy city, born from compassion and a single act of defiance. As they gathered their things, Angela said quietly, You know, Keanu, most good ideas fade by morning. He smiled as they stepped into the evening light. Then we'll make sure this one doesn't. The wind outside carried the city's hum, but to Keanu, it sounded like possibility. Justice for All wasn't just a name. Now it was a promise. Within 2 weeks, word of Justice for All had spread far beyond the coffee shop where it began. News stations across the country picked up the story Keanu Reeves launches legal aid foundation for the poor. The headlines were everywhere, from Los Angeles to small-town papers in the Midwest. Social media was flooded with praise and curiosity. Photos of Keanu standing beside Angela and the 2 young law students appeared online, their modest workspace filled with second-hand desks and piles of case files. Donations began trickling in through a hastily made website. Lawyers from across the country emailed, offering to volunteer part-time. Students asked how they could intern. For the first time, Angela's inbox was full of hope instead of desperation. But not everyone was impressed. Judge Harold Denton, the same man whose courtroom had ignited the movement, was invited for an interview on a morning news show. Sitting stiffly in his dark robe, he folded his hands and said, Actors should stick to acting. The justice system doesn't need celebrity interference. What happened in my courtroom was a violation of judicial decorum, not a display of heroism. The clip went viral within hours. Comment sections exploded with arguments. Some defended the judge, saying the law should remain impartial and free from public influence. Others fired back, claiming that impartiality had long since been lost for those without money or power. At Justice for All's small office, Angela turned down the volume on the TV and glanced at Keanu. Well, she said dryly, I guess that makes it official. We've got our first critic. Keanu smiled faintly. If doing the right thing makes people uncomfortable, we're on the right track. Nina, who had just walked in with a stack of papers, frowned. Keanu, this could get political fast. The media's framing it like you're declaring war on the courts. He shook his head calmly. We're not fighting anyone. We're helping people who have nowhere else to turn. Angela crossed her arms. That's a nice line, but he's a sitting judge. His words carry weight. Some of the local courts might refuse to cooperate now. Keanu's voice stayed steady. Then we'll help those who need us even more." The conversation ended there, not because the concern vanished, but because they had work to do. The first wave of applications had already arrived: letters, emails, even handwritten notes from people across the country. Angela opened the first envelope and read aloud. "A single mother in Fresno fined for missing school meetings because she works 2 jobs. She's lost her driver's license." Luke picked up another. "A veteran from Colorado missed a court hearing after a surgery. He's about to lose his disability benefits." Maya added softly. "A factory worker from Detroit fined $500 for an expired tag. He doesn't even own the car anymore." Keanu looked around the table. "Then let's start there." Angela smiled faintly, shaking her head. "You really don't scare easy, do you?" "I've seen worse things than bureaucracy," Keanu replied, "and none of them ever stopped me from trying." The team got to work immediately. Files spread across the table, phones buzzed, and printers hummed. Outside, the world argued over Keanu's motives. But inside the office, the only thing that mattered was the next name on the list. By the end of that week, Justice for All had already taken on its first 3 cases. They weren't high profile or glamorous. They were quiet battles, the kind that never made headlines, but changed entire lives. The first was Marcus Kelly, the single father Angela had mentioned before. When Keanu paid his bail, Marcus was released after 16 days behind bars. The moment he stepped into the small office, still wearing his county-issued clothes, he could barely speak. His voice cracked as he thanked them, saying, "No one's ever stood up for me before." Keanu shook his hand and replied softly, "Then let's make sure you're never alone again." The next case came from a retired bus driver named Gloria Hunt. She'd been fined nearly $1,000 for parking violations she didn't understand tickets issued while her car was broken down. Angela helped her file an appeal, and when she won, Gloria hugged everyone in the office, laughing through her tears. The third was a construction worker, a veteran named David Chen. He'd been arrested after missing a hearing about unpaid tickets while recovering from surgery. Luke and Maya worked late into the night drafting his petition. When the charges were dismissed, David sent them a photo of himself with his grandchildren, writing, "You gave me back my life." Each victory brought more requests. Angela's phone buzzed non-stop. The office printer jammed twice in one morning from overuse. They borrowed folding chairs from a nearby community center because people kept walking in looking for help. Still, the opposition grew louder too. Online, certain commentators accused Keanu of politicizing poverty. One op-ed read, "Celebrities can't fix systemic problems by throwing money at them. Real change takes more than publicity." When Nina showed him the article, Keanu only smiled. "They're right," he said. "It takes more than publicity. It takes persistence." Angela overheard and grinned. "You're starting to sound like one of us." He looked around at the team at the messy desks, the overworked volunteers, and the tired smiles and said, "I am one of you." The following morning, Judge Denton gave another statement to the press. "I will not apologize for upholding the law," he said sternly. "Justice must remain impartial, regardless of public sentiment." When Nina read the quote aloud, Keanu simply nodded. "He's doing his job," he said. "Now let's keep doing ours." Angela smiled at that. "You know, for someone who hates politics, you're starting a movement." Keanu shrugged lightly. "Maybe movements don't always start in crowds. Sometimes they start in small offices, with people who just refuse to look away." The office fell quiet again, but it wasn't silence. It was focus. Outside, the headlines kept spinning. Inside, Justice for All kept growing. One file, one case, one act of fairness at a time. The summer sun filtered through the windows of the Justice for All office, lighting up the space that had once been empty and quiet. Now it buzzed with life. Volunteers typed steadily at their desks, answering calls and filling out forms. Laughter occasionally broke through the low hum of conversation. The walls were lined with simple posters: fairness, dignity, access words that reminded everyone why they were there. Keanu stood by the doorway. helping a volunteer carry in boxes of donated laptops. Angela waved from across the room. "You've officially turned this place into a factory of hope," she said with a smile. He grinned back. "That's the goal." The bell above the door jingled as it opened. A young man stepped in, wearing oil-stained jeans and a faded blue shirt. His hands were rough, his face older than his years, but his eyes were bright. Keanu turned, recognition dawning instantly. "Darius," he said warmly. "It's good to see you." The young man smiled, a little shy but proud. "It's good to see you too, Mr. Reeves." Keanu motioned for him to sit. "Call me Keanu." "How have you been?" Darius hesitated before answering. "I've been good. Better than I thought I'd ever be, honestly. I got a steady job at a garage down in Inglewood. My boss says I've got a gift for fixing things." "That's great," Keanu said. "You look different, stronger." Darius laughed softly. "Feels that way too. I've been saving up money for classes, not just mechanic training though." Keanu tilted his head, intrigued. "Oh? What kind of classes?" Darius met his eyes. "Law. I've been taking night courses at the community college. I want to help guys like me, the ones who don't get a chance." For a moment, Keanu didn't speak. The sound of phones and typing filled the silence between them. Then he smiled, slow and full of pride. "You already are helping them, Darius, just by being here." Darius looked around the office. "This place, it's incredible. All these people working to help strangers. I read about the cases online, the veterans, the moms, the workers. I can't believe it all started in that courtroom." Angela walked over, wiping her hands with a paper towel. "He doesn't like to take credit," she said, nodding toward Keanu, "but he's the reason this place exists." Darius shook his head. "No, ma'am. He just reminded the world what fairness looks like." Angela smiled at that, a softness in her expression. "You'd make a good lawyer already." Darius chuckled. "Maybe one day." Keanu leaned back in his chair, studying him. "You know, I think that day's closer than you think." Darius glanced around again, his voice quiet. "When I walked into that courtroom, I thought my life was over. Now, I walk into places like this and realize it was just beginning." Keanu nodded. "That's exactly what this is about. Second chances. You don't owe anyone an apology for where you started, only gratitude for where you're going." Angela excused herself to take a phone call, leaving Keanu and Darius alone at the small wooden table near the window. The afternoon light caught the edge of Darius's worn jacket, the same one he'd worn the day of his trial. It looked different now, not a symbol of struggle, but survival. Keanu gestured toward the whiteboard on the wall where names of pending cases were written in blue marker. "See that list?" he asked. "Those are the people we're helping this month. Some can't pay their fines. Some just need someone to listen. But each one deserves to be heard." Darius nodded slowly. "That's the thing that hit me the hardest back then. Nobody wanted to listen. They'd already decided who I was before I even opened my mouth. That's why we're here," Keanu said softly. "To make sure that doesn't keep happening." Darius smiled. "You did more than just help me, Keanu. You gave me an example to follow. When I finish my courses, I want to come back here, work with you guys." Keanu's expression warmed. "You don't have to wait until then. We always need good people. You could mentor some of the teens we're helping with expungement cases." Darius hesitated, eyes brightening. "You'd really let me do that?" "Of course," Keanu said. "You've lived it. That's worth more than any textbook." At that, Darius stood and extended his hand. Keanu took it firmly, and for a moment, both men just stood there in mutual respect. Angela returned, smiling when she saw them. "What's going on here? A job offer already?" Keanu laughed. "Something like that." Angela picked up her phone and snapped a picture. "For the website," she said. "Two men who refused to give up." The flash went off, freezing the moment in time. Keanu, in his dark jacket beside Darius, in his grease-stained shirt, both smiling with quiet pride. That photo would soon appear on the Justice for All homepage, with a single caption beneath it. "One act of courage can change a life, sometimes two." Later that evening, As the office emptied, Keanu lingered by the door. He looked at the photo Angela had already printed and pinned to the wall. Darius was laughing in it, his smile wide and genuine. Nina joined him, holding her laptop. "That picture's everywhere already," she said. "People are calling it the face of the movement." Keanu looked at it, thoughtfully. "It's not a movement," he said. "It's a reminder. Anyone can stand up for someone else." Nina smiled softly. "You really believe that, don't you?" "I've seen it," Keanu said. "Once you see it, you can't unsee it." He turned off the lights, the room now illuminated only by the faint glow of that single photo on the wall. For the first time in months, he felt something close to peace, not because the work was done, but because he knew it was just beginning. Outside, the streetlights flickered to life. Inside, Justice for All kept shining one small office, one photo, and one story that would soon inspire thousands more. The peace that Justice for All had built didn't last long. Within 3 months, the backlash began. It started quietly, a few snide remarks in legal circles, whispers that the foundation was meddling in local cases. But soon, it grew louder. One morning, Angela walked into the office holding a folded newspaper, her expression grim. She dropped it on the table in front of Keanu. The headline read, "Hollywood's wannabe lawyer interferes with court system." Keanu read the line without flinching. Beneath the title was a photo of him standing beside Angela and Darius, cropped to look smug. The article accused Justice for All of undermining due process and using fame to influence judicial outcomes. Angela sighed. "They're quoting Judge Denton again. He's calling for an official review of our operations. Says we're trying to manipulate public perception of justice." Nina looked up from her laptop, frowning. "Social media's picking it up too. Some commentators are calling it a publicity stunt." Keanu leaned back in his chair, calm but thoughtful. "So that's their angle. Make it look like we're the problem." Angela crossed her arms. "This could get bad. If enough pressure builds, they could block us from accessing court records or even partnering with public defenders." Luke walked in with 2 coffees, overhearing the tail end. "Wait, they can actually do that?" Angela nodded. "They can try. It's all about intimidation. They don't like being challenged by outsiders, especially one who happens to be a movie star." Keanu smiled faintly. "Actors pretending to be lawyers on screen are fine, but the moment one stands up for real people, it's heresy." Angela rubbed her temples. "You're taking this awfully well." He shrugged lightly. "I've been called worse, but this isn't about me. It's about keeping people scared enough to stay silent." Nina scrolled through her phone, shaking her head. "It's working. Donors are hesitating. 2 sponsors pulled out this morning." Angela's voice dropped. "Maybe we should lay low for a while. Let it calm down." Keanu looked at her, his tone firm but kind. "No, that's exactly what they want. The louder the truth gets, the harder they'll try to bury it." She sighed, meeting his gaze. "You really think truth can survive politics?" "Truth doesn't need to survive," he said quietly. "It just needs someone brave enough to carry it." Angela fell silent, the words lingering between them. Luke and Maya exchanged glances, both young, idealistic, and now slightly shaken by how real things had become. Keanu stood and walked toward the whiteboard, filled with case names. "Every name up here represents someone who didn't get a fair chance. That's who we're doing this for. If people want to attack me, let them. But they won't silence what this stands for." Angela nodded slowly. "Then what do we do?" Keanu looked out the window, watching the afternoon traffic crawl by. "We don't hide," he said. "We speak." Angela sat back, thinking hard. "Speak? You mean another interview?" Keanu shook his head. "Not an interview. A press conference. If they want to twist our intentions, let's tell the truth ourselves in front of everyone." Nina looked up quickly. "Keanu, that's risky. The media's waiting for you to slip up. They'll bait you with loaded questions." He nodded calmly. "Then I'll answer them with honesty. We can't fight rumor with silence." Angela hesitated. You'd be putting yourself in the middle of this storm personally. The judge, the critics, they'll come after your reputation. Keanu's tone stayed even. Reputation doesn't matter if the people who need us lose faith. We built justice for all on transparency. We'll stand by it. The room was quiet for a moment, filled with the steady hum of the office printer. Luke finally broke the silence. If you're doing this, we'll back you up. We can prepare data, testimonies, case results show how we've actually helped people. Maya nodded. I'll gather letters from clients. People need to see real stories, not rumors. Angela looked around at the small team, exhausted, underpaid, but devoted. She smiled faintly. All right, she said. If we're doing this, we'll do it right. The next 2 days were a blur of preparation. Nina coordinated with reporters. Angela reviewed statements, and volunteers organized folders of data. They transformed the small office into a war room of truth. Photos of their clients lined the walls, veterans, single mothers, students, each one a reminder of what they were defending. Keanu spent the evenings writing notes on a yellow legal pad. He didn't want a scripted statement. He wanted something real, something that couldn't be spun into sound bites. On the morning of the conference, the courtyard outside the community hall filled quickly. Cameras flashed. Reporters murmured. Protesters from both sides gathered, some holding signs that read, "Justice is not a performance," while others held posters of Keanu with the words, "Stand for what's right." When Keanu stepped onto the stage, the noise died down. He stood behind the wooden podium, wearing a simple black suit. No entourage, no teleprompter. Angela, Nina, and the team stood just behind him. He looked out over the crowd and began quietly. I didn't start this foundation to make headlines. I started it because one day, I saw a man treated as less than human for not being able to afford fairness. The audience listened in silence. Our system shouldn't punish poverty, he continued. It shouldn't measure worth by a wallet. Justice for all isn't here to fight judges or politics. We're here to remind people that compassion belongs in every courtroom. Flashes from cameras illuminated his face, but his expression never changed. Calm, steady, true. Some say actors should stick to acting, he said, voice firm now. But I believe every citizen has the right and the duty to stand up when something's wrong. If doing the right thing makes people uncomfortable, then we're on the right track. Angela watched from behind the podium, her eyes glistening. Around her, reporters scribbled furiously. Even some of the skeptics had stopped typing, simply listening. Keanu paused, his final words measured. We can't fix everything overnight. But if we can change one outcome, help one person find fairness, then it's worth every criticism. Truth doesn't need protection. It just needs courage. The courtyard erupted in applause, not thunderous, but sincere, the kind that comes from understanding, not excitement. Angela joined him at the podium, placing a hand on his arm. You did it, she whispered. He smiled gently. We did it. As they walked off stage, Nina's phone buzzed with notifications. Major outlets were already broadcasting the speech live. The headline read simply, Keanu Reeves defends justice for all, truth has its own defense. The tide had begun to turn. The morning air in downtown Los Angeles was crisp and clear as hundreds gathered on the courthouse steps. Reporters clustered in tight circles, cameras mounted on tripods, cords snaking across the concrete. Police officers stood nearby, maintaining order as the crowd grew. Some held signs of support that read, Justice for all means everyone, while others simply watched in curiosity. Angela stood near the front, glancing at her watch. He'll be here any minute, she told Nina, who was busy adjusting microphones at the podium. Doesn't feel real, does it? Nina said quietly. This all started in a courtroom with 20 people, and now look at this. Angela nodded, her expression steady. Truth spreads faster than we think. A sudden murmur rippled through the crowd as Keanu appeared at the top of the courthouse steps. He wasn't surrounded by security, or a press team, just walked calmly, dressed simply in a dark gray suit and open-collar shirt. The sun caught the silver in his hair as he approached the podium. Flashes erupted. Reporters leaned forward. The air buzzed with anticipation. Keanu took a moment before speaking. letting the noise settle. His voice carried clearly through the microphone. "Thank you all for being here. I didn't call this press conference to defend myself. I called it to defend something bigger, the belief that justice shouldn't depend on your bank account." The words landed heavily in the morning air. The crowd went quiet. "Justice isn't a privilege for those who can afford it," he continued. "It's a right for everyone. When we forget that, we lose what makes this country worth believing in." Angela watched from the side, her heart pounding with quiet pride. The cameras zoomed closer. Keanu's tone remained calm, measured, and sincere the same way it had been that day in the courtroom. He went on. "Our foundation, Justice for All, doesn't exist to embarrass anyone or challenge authority. It exists to remind us that authority means nothing without accountability. Every person deserves to be heard, defended, and treated with dignity, whether they're a millionaire or a mechanic." From the crowd, a young woman called out, "What about Judge Denton? Do you regret challenging him?" Keanu turned toward her, voice, his tone even. "I don't challenge people. I challenge systems that forget people. The judge did his job as he saw fit. I'm just asking whether the job still serves everyone equally." There was a pause, and then a round of applause broke out. It began softly, then grew louder, spreading through the crowd until the entire plaza echoed with it. Keanu waited for the sound to fade before continuing. "I believe in good judges. I believe in honest lawyers. I believe in this country, but belief means nothing without action. So we'll keep doing what we do, one case, one person at a time." Behind him, Angela smiled, her eyes glistening. Nina looked out at the growing crowd, realizing it wasn't just media anymore. Ordinary citizens had shown up, veterans in faded jackets, students holding notebooks, working parents clutching their children's hands. They weren't there for spectacle. They were there because something real was happening. Keanu's voice softened as he looked out over them. "If this foundation proves anything, it's that empathy still matters. That a stranger can stand up for another and remind us what justice truly looks like. That's all we're trying to do here." The applause started again, louder this time, rolling like a wave. Reporters put down their pens, listening instead of questioning. Keanu stepped back from the microphone, took a breath, and nodded. The words had been spoken. The truth finally was louder than the noise. As the applause echoed against the marble steps, Keanu stood silently for a moment, taking in the sight before him. There were no red carpets, no flashing movie lights, just people. People from every walk of life, standing together because they believed in something pure. A reporter near the front raised his hand, hesitantly. "Mr. Reeves, some claim your foundation is overstepping, that it's disrupting the balance of the courts. What do you say to that?" Keanu met the man's eyes. "If fairness is disrupted by compassion, then maybe the system needs a little disruption," he said gently. "We're not here to fight the law. We're here to remind it who it's meant to serve." That line drew another round of cheers. The sound wasn't wild or angry. It was grounded, sincere, the kind that comes from people recognizing truth. Angela glanced at Nina, whispering, "He's not speaking to the cameras anymore. He's speaking to them." Nina nodded. "That's why it works." Keanu looked out again, his gaze landing on a small group standing near the back. Darius and his mother, Elaine. They were holding hands, smiling proudly. When Darius noticed Keanu looking, he lifted a hand in silent thanks. Keanu gave a slight nod in return, a gesture that said everything words couldn't. Another reporter spoke up. "Mr. Reeves, what do you hope to achieve from all this?" Keanu thought for a moment before answering. "I hope one day foundations like ours don't have to exist. I hope a person can walk into a courtroom without fear of being dismissed because of what they earn or where they live. Until then, we'll keep standing beside them." The applause returned, louder and more sustained. People began chanting softly, "Justice for all, justice for all." Angela stepped forward, standing beside Keanu as the chant grew. The sound filled the square, veterans, students, parents, and workers, all repeating the same phrase. For the first time in months, Angela felt hope replacing exhaustion. Keanu leaned toward the microphone one last time. "This isn't my fight alone. It's ours. Every time you speak up for someone who can't, every time you show empathy where others show judgment, you're part of justice for all." He stepped back, the chant swelling again until it drowned out the city noise. Cameras captured the moment Keanu Reeves standing on the courthouse steps, calm, humble, and resolute. And for one brief, unforgettable morning, justice didn't feel distant. It felt human again. The courtroom was quiet after hours, long past the time when clerks had gone home and the last of the janitors had swept through the halls. Judge Harold Denton sat in his office, the glow of the television flickering across his desk. The screen showed a replay of Keanu Reeves standing on the courthouse steps, speaking to the world with calm conviction. Denton leaned back, his jaw tight. He had watched the clip 3 times already. Each time, it stirred something in him he didn't want to name. The man he had dismissed as an overreaching actor was now being hailed as a voice of conscience. The crowd's chant "Justice for All" echoed faintly from the TV speakers. His clerk, a young woman named Hannah, knocked gently on the door. "Judge, it's late. You should go home." He didn't turn from the screen. "You've seen this, haven't you?" She stepped closer, her tone cautious. "Everyone's seen it, sir. It's everywhere." He muted the television and looked up at her. "Do you think he's right?" Hannah hesitated, then nodded. "I think he's brave, and I think people are listening because they've been waiting for someone to say what he said." Denton frowned. "You think I'm the villain in all this?" She smiled faintly. "I think you were doing your job the way you were taught. But the world's changing, sir. People expect more now. Empathy, transparency, fairness." Her honesty stung, but it didn't anger him. He dismissed her with a nod. "Go home, Hannah. Get some rest." When the door closed behind her, he turned off the television and sat in silence. The courtroom he'd ruled over for 3 decades flashed through his mind, the faces of defendants, the excuses he'd ignored, the stories he'd refused to hear. He told himself it was duty, not cruelty. That justice demanded efficiency, but for the first time, those justifications felt hollow. He reached for a dusty box on the shelf behind his desk, pulling down an old case file. State v. Melvin Ross, 1998. He remembered the name. A young man caught shoplifting groceries. He'd fined him heavily, scoffing when the boy claimed he was feeding his family. 2 months later, Denton had heard the man had taken his own life. He'd buried that memory under paperwork and pride. Now it sat open on his desk, like an accusation. He stared at the faded pages, the ink smudged with time. "I could have done better," he murmured. The clock on the wall ticked softly. Somewhere in the distance, city sirens wailed. Denton leaned back, the weight of years pressing against his chest. He wasn't an evil man, but maybe that was the problem. Too many good men had done nothing while others suffered under the systems they built. He closed the file slowly and whispered into the empty room. "He's right. Justice isn't supposed to humiliate." The following morning, Judge Denton arrived at the courthouse earlier than usual. The halls were quiet, and sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the marble floors he had walked for decades. But that morning, the building felt different, heavier somehow, as if the walls themselves were listening. He entered his chambers and sat down, his eyes lingering on the old case file still resting on his desk. He hadn't slept much. The faces from his past had followed him through the night, men and women whose lives he'd reduced to fines and sentences. Every harsh word, every time he'd ignored a plea for help, replayed in his head like echoes he could no longer silence. When Hannah arrived, she stopped in the doorway, surprised to see him there so early. "Sir, are you all right?" He looked up at her, his expression softer than she'd ever seen. "I've been better," he said. "Sit down, please." She hesitated, then took the chair opposite him. Denton folded his hands. "You said something last night that the world is changing, that people expect empathy. Now." Hannah nodded cautiously. "Yes, sir," he sighed. "I think I've forgotten what that looks like. Somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing people and started seeing paperwork. There was a long pause. Hannah didn't speak, afraid that saying the wrong thing might make him retreat back into the judge she knew, the man of iron rules and cold authority. But he didn't retreat. He kept going. "I watched that man, Reeves," Denton said. "I mocked him once, thought he was trespassing on something sacred. But now I realize he was reminding us what sacred really means." Hannah smiled faintly. "He didn't attack you, sir. He just asked questions no one wanted to ask." Denton nodded. "And I dismissed him for it." He rubbed his temples. 30 years on this bench, and it took an actor to remind me that justice is supposed to heal, not humiliate. He turned toward the window, the city skyline gleaming in the morning sun. "I've spent my career defending a system that defends itself. Maybe it's time I stopped doing that." Hannah leaned forward. "Sir, are you saying I'm saying I need to do something?" He interrupted. "Not just feel bad about it." He reached for his phone, scrolling through his contacts. "Get me the number for Angela Rivera, the public defender who works with that foundation." Hannah blinked in surprise. "You want to talk to her?" "I want to listen," he said simply. Within the hour, Angela answered the call. Her voice carried a hint of suspicion. "Judge Denton?" "Yes," he said quietly. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Depends what this is about," she replied. He hesitated before speaking. "About reform, about understanding where I've failed." Angela was silent for a long moment. "You're serious?" "I've been serious my whole life," he said. "Just not always about the right things. I saw your foundation. I saw what you and Reeves built. You're doing something I should have done years ago, giving people a voice." Angela's tone softened slightly. "You really mean that?" "I do," he said. "And if you'll let me, I'd like to help." Maybe it's time the court stopped treating compassion like a weakness. On the other end of the line, Angela exhaled slowly. "All right, Judge. Let's talk." When he hung up, Denton sat back, the morning light spilling across his desk. For the first time in decades, the weight on his shoulders felt lighter. He didn't know what redemption looked like yet, but he knew where to begin by finally listening to the people he'd spent a lifetime judging. 6 months passed, and Justice for All had grown from a small local project into a movement that reached far beyond Los Angeles. The office had expanded, now filled with volunteers from across the country, retired attorneys, law students, and even former clients who wanted to give back. The phones never stopped ringing. Hope had become contagious. One Friday morning, Angela burst through the door, holding a manila envelope high in the air. "We did it!" she shouted. The entire office turned toward her. The appellate court just overturned the conviction. "We won." Keanu stood from his desk. "Which case?" She grinned widely. "Devin Harris, the teenager from San Bernardino, the one who was sentenced to 5 years for a car theft he didn't commit." The room went silent for a moment, then erupted in cheers. Luke and Maya hugged each other, nearly knocking over a stack of papers. Nina clapped her hands and said, "We just changed a life." Keanu exhaled slowly, emotion flickering across his face. "No," he said quietly, "you all did. Every late night, every document, every argument, you made this happen." Angela opened the folder, reading from the official statement. "Conviction vacated. All charges dismissed. The court acknowledges new evidence provided by Justice for All, revealing misidentification." Her voice cracked as she finished the sentence. Devin Harris was only 17 when he'd been arrested for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. His family couldn't afford an attorney, and his public defender had met him only once before advising him to plead guilty. For over a year, he'd sat behind bars for a crime someone else committed. Now, because of Angela's persistence and the team's determination, he was going home. That afternoon, Devin and his mother came to the office. He was thin and quiet, his eyes full of disbelief. Keanu greeted him with a handshake, then pulled him into a gentle hug. "You're free now," Keanu said softly. Devin nodded, struggling to hold back tears. "I don't even know how to thank you." Angela smiled warmly. "Just live your life. That's all the thanks we need." Reporters later arrived to document the moment. One asked Keanu if this victory changed how he saw his mission. He looked at the young man beside him and said, "It doesn't change it. It confirms it. Justice doesn't happen by accident. It happens when people care enough to fight for it." The story spread like wildfire. Every major network carried the headline, "Justice for All wins appeal. Wrongfully convicted teen freed." The photo of Devon standing beside Keanu and Angela became a symbol of triumph and truth. That evening, the foundation's inbox overflowed with messages from lawyers, professors, and activists across the nation. Law schools began reaching out, offering partnerships to train students in legal aid work. Donations poured in. More importantly, other cities began establishing their own chapters of Justice for All. For the first time, it wasn't just a foundation, it was a movement. A week later, a local news station aired a feature segment on Justice for All. The broadcast opened with footage of Devon Harris stepping out of the courthouse into the sunlight, his mother clutching his core arm, tears streaming down her face. The reporter's voice narrated, "Today, a young man walks free, thanks to the quiet determination of a foundation that began with a single act of courage." Inside the office, everyone gathered around the television to watch. Angela stood with her arms crossed, her eyes bright. Luke and Maya sat on the edge of their desks, smiling like proud siblings. Keanu leaned against the doorway, arms folded, watching in silence. The segment cut to an interview with Darius Coleman. He sat in front of the camera wearing a crisp shirt, his once nervous voice now steady and confident. "If not for Mr. Reeves," he said, "I might still believe justice was for other people. He didn't just change my life, he made me believe that fairness belongs to everyone." The room fell quiet. Angela's throat tightened as she watched the screen. Darius's sincerity wasn't rehearsed or polished, it was real. The reporter's voice continued. "What began as a simple gesture in a courtroom has turned into a national movement. Justice for All has helped dozens of families navigate unfair fines, wrongful arrests, and denied representation. Its message has reached millions." The next clip showed a crowd outside another courthouse, not in Los Angeles, but in Chicago, holding signs that read, "Equal justice, one case at a time." Then, one in Denver, then Atlanta. Each city had started its own branch, led by volunteers inspired by the story. Keanu turned away from the television for a moment, overwhelmed. Angela noticed and walked over. "You okay?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Yeah, I just never thought it would grow like this. I just wanted to help one person." Angela smiled. That's how real change starts, one person at a time. Nina's phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at the screen and grinned. "You're going to want to see this," she said. "The state attorney just announced a review of public defense funding. They're using Justice for All as a model." Angela's eyes widened. "You're kidding." "Nope," Nina said, handing her the phone. "It's official." Keanu smiled quietly. "Looks like truth travels faster than fame." Outside the office window, the evening sun cast long rays across the city. The world was still imperfect, still unfair in countless ways, but something fundamental had shifted. The story that began with silence in a courtroom was now echoing across the country. Angela walked to the window beside him. "You know, Keanu," she said, "this movement doesn't belong to you anymore." He smiled. "Good. It was never supposed to." Down on the street below, volunteers exited the building in groups, laughing, carrying case folders and coffee cups. They looked like ordinary people, because they were. And that was the point. Justice for All had become more than an organization. It had become a mirror reflecting the best of what people could be when they chose compassion over comfort and courage over silence. Snowflakes drifted through the gray Detroit morning as Keanu stepped out of the car and looked up at the modest brick building before him. The sign above the entrance read, "Justice for All, Detroit Branch." Beneath it, a mural stretched across the side wall, two hands, one calloused and one clean, holding the scales of justice together. Around it were painted words in bold letters: fairness, dignity, hope. Angela was waiting for him at the front door. bundled in a long coat and scarf. "You're right on time," she said, smiling. "You always are." Keanu laughed softly. "Traffic wasn't bad. Guess the universe wanted me here." She led him inside, her voice echoing through the warm, bustling space. The office was alive with energy, volunteers answering phones, law students helping clients with forms, and a small group gathered near a coffee table covered in donated pastries. The walls were lined with photos of people whose lives had changed because of their work, families reunited, fines erased, charges dismissed. Darius appeared from the back room, wearing a tailored suit with grease still faintly smudged on his hands, as if he'd just come from the garage. His grin was wide. "I didn't think you'd actually come in person, Keanu." Keanu shook his hand firmly. "I wouldn't miss it. This place, it's incredible." Darius laughed. "It's chaos, but it's our kind of chaos." Angela gestured around proudly. "We opened just 6 months ago. You should have seen it before. Peeling paint, broken desks. The volunteers fixed it up themselves." Keanu smiled, taking it all in. "You've turned it into something beautiful." A young woman nearby overheard and smiled shyly. "It's because of you," she said. "I saw your story last year. It made me switch from corporate law to public defense." Keanu's expression softened. "Then, it's because of all of us." Angela handed him a visitor badge. "Come on. There's someone you should meet." They walked down a narrow hallway toward a small room where a woman in her 60s sat nervously with a stack of papers. "This is Mrs. Carter," Angela explained. "She's been fighting an eviction after her landlord filed false claims. We're helping her appeal." Keanu nodded to her kindly. "You're in good hands here, Mrs. Carter." The woman's eyes watered. "Thank you, Mr. Reeves. It gives me hope, knowing people like you care." He smiled gently. "We all should." As they stepped back into the hallway, Keanu turned to Darius. "You're running this branch?" Darius nodded proudly. "Angela oversees operations, but I handle outreach. We've helped over 300 people already." Keanu chuckled. 300? That's 300 lives made lighter." Darius shrugged modestly. "It's a start. Detroit's full of people who just need a chance." They paused by the mural in the lobby again, the painted scales of justice gleaming in the light. Keanu stared at it for a moment. "It feels different here," he said softly. "More real. Like the work's finally reached the people who need it most." Angela smiled. "That's because it has." They stepped outside a few minutes later, the cold air brushing against their faces. The sun had begun to rise through the gray clouds, casting a pale glow across the snow-dusted street. A long line of people stood outside the building, men and women bundled in coats, holding envelopes, folders, and hope. Keanu looked at them quietly. Some faces were young, some old, but all wore the same expression, cautious optimism. A mother held her daughter's hand tightly, while a man in a construction jacket clutched a stack of overdue bills. A veteran stood at the end of the line, straight-backed, despite the cold. Darius followed Keanu's gaze. "They start lining up before we even open," he said softly. "Some drive from 2 hours away just to get an appointment. We can't help everyone yet, but we try." Keanu nodded. "You are helping. Just by showing up, you're proving it's possible." He watched as one of the volunteers brought out coffee for the people waiting, pouring it into paper cups and offering quiet words of encouragement. It reminded him of something he'd said long ago, that compassion wasn't weakness, it was strength. Seeing it alive here made the words feel more true than ever. He turned to Darius with a small smile. "This," he said, gesturing to the line, "this is what hope looks like when it wears work boots." Darius laughed. "And a suit when it has to fight." Keanu chuckled, shaking his head. "I like that." Angela joined them outside, her breath visible in the cold air. "You should see how people react when they realize Darius used to be one of our first cases. He's become a local legend." Darius shrugged modestly. "I just tell them if I could come back from where I was, anyone can." Angela smiled. "That's exactly why they listen." They stood there together for a moment, watching the line move forward as the doors opened. Inside, the sound of typewriters and printers hummed, mixing with quiet conversation. The building wasn't grand, but it was alive with purpose. Keanu turned back toward the mural once more, the painted scales catching the faint light. "You know," he said softly, "when we started this, I thought it would be a small thing. A few cases. Maybe a little awareness. I never imagined it would turn into something this real." Angela looked at him. "You planted the seed, Keanu. We just made sure it grew." Darius added, "You gave us something better than charity. You gave us dignity." Keanu met his eyes and nodded. "You gave it to yourselves. All I did was remind people they had it." A gust of wind blew past, carrying the sound of laughter from the line. For a moment, everything felt still. The city, the snow, noise of the world. Keanu smiled as he looked at Angela and Darius. "Keep doing what you're doing," he said quietly. "The world needs this more than ever." Angela's eyes softened. "And what about you?" He smiled faintly. "I'll keep walking. There's always another courtroom, another story that needs light." As he turned to leave, Darius called after him, "You'll always have a place here." Keanu stopped, glanced back, and smiled. "I know." Then he walked into the snowy street, the line of people stretching behind him, a living testament that justice, once awakened, never goes back to sleep. The city was quiet again that night. Keanu sat at his desk, a single lamp illuminating the pages of his worn leather journal. Outside the window, the faint glow of courthouse lights shimmered against the dark sky. The same building that had once been a stage for humiliation had now become a symbol of change. He opened his journal to a blank page and began to write, his pen moving slowly, thoughtfully. Justice begins the moment one person refuses to stay silent. He paused, reading the sentence back to himself. It wasn't poetic, but it was true. He had seen it in Darius's trembling courage, in Angela's relentless fight, in every volunteer who had chosen compassion over comfort. Justice wasn't born from speeches or laws alone. It began quietly in the hearts of ordinary people who simply refused to turn away. He leaned back, listening to the low hum of the city. In the distance, sirens wailed faintly, then faded. His mind drifted through everything that had happened that first courtroom confrontation, the backlash, the long nights spent building something real. He thought about Judge Denton's unexpected call, the moment he'd realized even the stubborn could change. He smiled softly. On his desk lay a framed photograph, the one Angela had taken in Detroit. Darius stood beside him, smiling under the mural that read, "Fairness, dignity, hope." The colors of the wall reflected faintly in the lamplight, and Keanu's chest tightened with quiet pride. His phone buzzed, the vibration echoing in the stillness of the room. He picked it up, expecting a message from Angela or Nina. Instead, it was an email forwarded by the foundation. A man from Alabama, a father of 3, facing eviction after being laid off. No lawyer, no money, no chance. Keanu read the message slowly, his heart heavy but resolute. He whispered to himself, "We're not done yet." He set the phone down and looked back out the window. The courthouse lights in the distance flickered faintly through the fog. They reminded him of something: not power, not law, but purpose. The reason he'd stood up that first day. The reason he couldn't stop now. He wrote again in his journal, the words forming easily now. Justice doesn't live in buildings or robes. It lives in moments when someone chooses to care. When silence breaks, when one hand reaches for another. He underlined the last sentence twice, closed the journal, and sat in the quiet glow of the lamp, his thoughts steady and his heart at peace. Keanu sat for a long time, staring out the window as the night deepened. The courthouse lights in the distance seemed to pulse softly through the haze, distant but constant, like a quiet reminder that there would always be more work to do. The city beneath him never truly slept, and neither did the need for fairness. He rose from his chair and walked toward the window. From this height, the streets looked peaceful, but he knew every block held a story. Somewhere, a mother was wondering how to keep her home. Somewhere else, a young man was sitting in a holding cell because he couldn't afford a fine. He pressed his hand lightly against the glass, his reflection staring back at him. The foundation had grown beyond anything he imagined, but the mission still felt personal, deeply, quietly personal. It wasn't about his fame or name anymore. It was about responsibility. The kind that comes when you've seen something wrong and can't forget it. Behind him, the soft buzz of his phone broke the silence again. Another message from Nina appeared. It was a report from the Detroit branch. Case 348. Resolved single mother's charges dropped. Kids reunited. Keanu smiled, his eyes softening. Every time one life got a second chance, it reaffirmed everything he believed. He whispered under his breath, "That's what it's all for." He walked back to his desk, flipped open his journal again, and wrote a few final lines before closing it for the night. Justice doesn't need fame to survive. It needs hands that work, hearts that listen, and voices that refuse to go quiet. The rest will follow. He closed the book gently, turned off the lamp, and let the soft glow of the courthouse guide his eyes once more. The weight of the day began to fade, replaced by that same quiet conviction that had carried him from the start, that what began as one man's choice to stand up could ripple farther than he'd ever know. He took a breath, steady and full. Somewhere out there, people were still waiting for help, still believing that fairness was a dream too far away. He knew now that dreams could be built, one small act at a time. Before heading to bed, he glanced again at the phone screen, still glowing on his desk. The message from Alabama remained open. The man's words echoed in his mind. "I don't know who else to call. Please, help me," Keanu whispered softly into the still air. "We're not done yet." The words weren't dramatic, but they carried power. They were a promise to keep going, to keep standing, to keep believing that the fight for fairness was worth every obstacle. Outside, the first light of dawn began to break, soft and golden. The courthouse lights dimmed as the sun rose behind it. Keanu watched the change quietly, feeling a sense of renewal. In the morning calm, he reached for his coffee mug, now cold, and smiled to himself. The day would bring new battles, but that was all right. The fight was never meant to end, only to inspire others to continue it. And as the world slowly came awake again, Keanu whispered one last line to himself, the kind that would stay with anyone who heard it. Justice begins the moment one person refuses to stay silent. Closing reflection. For text to speech. Have you ever witnessed something unfair and wished you'd spoken up? Tell me in the comments, what would justice mean to you? And what would you have done if you were in that courtroom?